that is the biggest, and that's frankly the most common tax headache that I see in my tax practice. And so I want to help you head it off, because this time of year, before you have all that documentation in the door, fixing your mistakes, if you see those 1099s come in and the amounts are wrong, your name is wrong, your social security number is wrong, et cetera, or if you don't get 1099s you think you're supposed to, certainly if you owe 1099s and you haven't sent those out, make sure you do that before midnight tonight. So I hope that that has helped you understand. And hopefully what we've done today is head off some big tax headaches for you this season. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for creative people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're an artist, designer, or creative entrepreneur who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your own time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello, how are you doing today? I just did a live workshop today about issuing 1099s. And while it's getting pretty late, if you still need to issue 1099s, you have today. This episode is going to launch on the 31st of January, which is the postmark deadline. If you need to send 1099s out, if you paid any contractors in 2022, it's getting a little late for that, but you still have, today. But what I want to do for you today is for the rest of you who are receiving 1099s, right? Those of us who are freelance contractors, self-employed people, we get a lot of 1099s. I want to answer for you the questions that have been coming up a lot for me in my practice to help you as you start getting your 1099s in the door and you have questions about those. So this is going to be a really short, sweet, practical episode to just help clarify some of the things that I know you may have been feeling some confusion on. And yes, if you are really running very last minute and you still have 1099s you need to send out, that you need to issue, you can still get the recording of that class that I gave today, but this is a week ago in time that I'm recording this because the postmark deadline is tonight. So if you wanted to get that course, courses.sunlighttax.com/1099, that's where you can get that course. Course costs less than one late 1099 penalty. So just so you know. Anyway, but for most of you, I just want to answer the 1099 questions that you have coming up about the 1099s you're receiving. So now I'm talking about going the other way, 1099s you're getting. All right. Question number one. Do I report income if it's under $600, which is the reporting threshold for a 1099? Or if I didn't get a 1099 for that income? All right, here's the law. The law says you must report your income. All right, it's super clear. It doesn't say you only report your income if it's paid on credit card. It doesn't say you don't have to report your income if it was cash. It doesn't say you don't have to report your income if you didn't get a 1099 telling the IRS about that income, right? We are honest people. We follow the law, and the law is very clear. You report your income. That is your mandatory duty as a self-employed person, to report all of your income and to pay the corresponding tax on it, self-employment tax and income tax. So absolutely, yes, you do have to report that income. All right. And the good news is, and we're going to get to this, if other people are not complying with the law, if you're not getting 1099s that you should be getting, as long as you do that, as long as you do report the 1099 income as you should be, all of your freelance income as you should be, you won't get in trouble because you are complying with the law, you're doing the right thing, and you will be okay. That is a fixable position if things get messed up. All right. So, I like to give the example of a person who, let's say you bill out a service. Actually, I could use Sunlight Tax as an example. In early days of Sunlight Tax, before I was an S Corp, who is not required to get a 1099, but when I was just a sole proprietor, just billing tax returns. And when my average tax return cost was under $600, just imagine my entire income for the year at Sunlight Tax would be paid in increments below $600. None of the clients, therefore, needed to issue me a 1099. But that still represents 100% of my income, right? Does that mean I don't report 100% of my income? I don't have to pay tax on 100% of my income? I think intuitively, every single one of you listening to that example knows the answer. Of course I do. That's my income. I should have to pay income tax on it and self-employment tax. So you know what's right. I'm just clarifying that for you. Okay. What do I do if my 1099 is wrong? Ugh, this is an ugly one. And you know what? It happens. So if you get a 1099 and you see that some of the information on it is not correct, you want to contact the person who issued you the 1099. And don't wait. This is something that is better done immediately and not left until later, because later the paperwork gets more onerous and challenging. Okay. So if someone issues you an incorrect 1099, it is fixable. It's fixable. They can issue a corrected 1099 and correct the mistake. Okay. But they do need to do that. Otherwise, legally, you're on the hook for that incorrect 1099. Okay. So some really important reasons you would correct a 1099. One, if the dollar amount they report to you is wrong, right? That's really important because you are going to be taxed on that amount. That's the amount you have to report and you have to match up in the IRS system. So if that dollar amount is wrong, you need to make sure it gets fixed. Okay. Just imagine that somebody paid you $2,000 and they accidentally stuck an extra zero on there and you get a 1099 that reports that they paid you $20,000. Well, you didn't get 20,000, but you are going to get taxed on 20,000. So that's a pretty extreme example, but it happens. And that is a situation where you want to go back to the person who gave you the 1099 and you need to ask them to issue a correction. A corrected 1099 is not a huge deal. They can absolutely do it. There's a box on a 1099 where they're going to click corrected, and then they revise the 1099 with the new amount. They send the new 1096 to the IRS, and you'll be all set. This does take a minute, right? It's not going to be instantaneous. So if you wait until April 14th, you are not going to get that paperwork in time. So you want to do it as early in the season as you possibly can. Super important to know. Likewise, if you messed up and you sent out a 1099 and you realize retroactively it was wrong, maybe you spelled the person's name wrong. Maybe you got their social security number wrong. Maybe you put the wrong amount on there. You also need to issue a corrected 1099. Do be sure that you are issuing a corrected one. You want to follow the procedure for issuing a corrected 1099. You can find the rules on the 1099. On the IRS website. You want to follow those rules and you want to make sure that it says corrected. Otherwise, what you're actually doing is just issuing them another additional 1099. So you could actually, and I've seen it happen, where somebody thinks they're issuing a corrected 1099, but they forget to check the box that says corrected. And then effectively what you're doing is just adding additional income to the first 1099 you issue to the person. So it's very, very important. Even though it's a tiny little detail, it's a detail you need to get right. Okay. What if someone doesn't want to give you a 1099, even though you know the rules say that they should? This ties into the next question, so I'll lump them together, which is, what if someone doesn't want you to give them a 1099? This is, a little bit common. We see this, right? That people want to stay under the table, under the radar. They don't want to report their income to the IRS. They don't want to comply with the law. And they're trying to make you complicit in that. Well, another way to phrase these questions would be, is it okay for me to help somebody break the law? And so I think when I phrase it that way for you, you know the answer. I think you know the IRS attitude when I phrase it that way too. So just to be super clear, when you're being requested that, you're being asked to help them break the law. So I would say the answer is a very clear no, you shouldn't do that. So that doesn't mean that you can control their behavior or you can make them see the light. I do encourage you to try. And I always say that this is a great use of an accountant. If you want to go blame your accountant for this, you don't have to be the bad guy. You can say, look, my accountant really needs you to do this. I'm sorry, there's such a pain in the butt. I wish I could do what you wanted, but I just can't because my accountant refuses to sign my tax return until you do this thing, right? So you can always blame your accountant. That's completely fine. You can even say, blame the Sunlight tax lady. That's fine by me. Yeah. The answer is no. You do have to issue 1099s that you are owed, even if that person doesn't want to receive it. You do still have to issue that 1099. Likewise, if somebody doesn't want to issue you a 1099, but they owe you one because they paid you through the course of the year, the thing is, the only person you can really control is yourself. So you can control the fact that you comply with the law. You can't really do much more than try to help the other person understand that they're, breaking the law, that they do need to do the right thing. But if they just are going to insist on not doing the right thing, there's not a lot you can do there. So what I will say is, first of all, if it's about somebody issuing you a 1099, your job is to report your income. Okay. So you report that income from that source on your Schedule C. And then if that person comes to light, or more likely, if their accountant refuses to sign their tax return until they issue that 1099 that they owe you, and this does happen, that will mean, and often does mean, you don't get your 1099 in early February, late January, as you're supposed to. You might not get that 1099 for months and months and months later when they actually get around to doing their taxes and their accountant insists that they do this. What that means for you is you might get a 1099 in the mail late after you've already filed your taxes. And if you haven't reported that income on your tax return, you're in trouble now. So this is just further proof that what you should always do, doing the right thing, is going to serve you. You want to report the income that you earned from that source. And then if you do get that stray 1099 that you didn't think you were going to get, it is annoying. You do have to write a letter to the IRS. You have to respond and say, I already reported this income in my gross receipts total. It's already included in that number. And you just prove it with whatever documentation you have to show, in fact, that gross receipts total did include that line item. You might take a screenshot of your bookkeeping. You might include their invoice, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, going in the reverse direction. So if you paid a contractor and they really want it to be unreported income and you want to do the reporting, that is the law, you don't really have a lot of leeway here. You do have to do it, right? So you cannot sign your tax return. What you want to know is that your Schedule C has a checkbox on it that says, did you issue the 1099s to contractors you paid over $600 to, or all the 1099s that you were obligated to? Did you do it? That's a checkbox on your Schedule C. So if you are filing a tax return, you are going to be attesting that you have done this, right? If you attest to that, and remember, your signature is on your tax return, taking responsibility for everything on it. If you attest to that and you sign your tax return and you haven't issued all the 1099s, you've just perjured yourself. You have lied on a document that goes to the IRS. So just want to, this. I know you know this, but you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to do that. And no accountant is going to help you do that. It is our legal obligation to back out or to refuse to sign or move forward with a client if we know they're doing that. So I just want to be really, really clear. There's a lot of enforcement mechanism kind of built in. The IRS can come down on accountants who help you not, if an accountant lets you not do what you are signing your tax return and saying you're doing, they can get punished by their licensing agency, whether it's the IRS or the state. So they're not going to do it. So it's just really important for you to understand that you got to issue your 1099s. And, it's too bad if there are people who, kind of feel like they shouldn't report their income. So I always think it's good to have a nice clarifying conversation right up front when you hire somebody, just like ask them to fill out the W-9 for you. That's actually a good first step under any circumstances. When you pay somebody, have them fill out the W-9, and then you have the paperwork that you need and you're required to ask for to issue your 1099s in January when it's time to do that. It also might interest you to know that if you hire somebody and they refuse to give you their tax ID number, their TIN, then you actually are required by the IRS to do what is called backup withholding. And what that means is you're actually required, the refusal to give their TIN to you, their tax ID number, obligates you, the payer, to withhold 24% of the pay that you would be giving them so that they earn. And you now become obligated to remit it directly to the IRS yourself. You are not even allowed to give that 24% to them, even though they earned it. So refusing to give your tax ID number to the person paying you is pretty serious, and the IRS has an enforcement mechanism there. So that's the big guns reason why you should comply with the law. But I just want you to understand that the IRS backs this up with punishment. All right, that was a little scary. I hope you're still with me here. Should I check on my 1099s? My answer for this is yes, basically just to avoid a headache. Okay. So if you are expecting 1099s or you think you should be issued 1099s by various organizations or people who've paid you throughout the year, but you haven't received them yet. And here we are, right? When you're listening to this episode is coming out on January 31st. This is the postmark deadline for them. So if you don't get those 1099s in a couple of days, they didn't issue them or they're late. It's definitely worth a phone call to reassure yourself, like, maybe there's some legitimate reason that they don't owe you a 1099. Maybe they paid you through a credit card and they know that rule, and so they didn't. That's fine. That's totally fine. But you want to be on the same page with them and know if that 1099 is coming, because it is worth waiting to receive a late 1099 before you file your tax return to avoid the automated letter from the IRS that will come to you if you file your tax return but fail to report one of your 1099s on it. Okay. So it is going to cause you a headache if somebody gives you a late 1099 or doesn't give you a 1099 or thinks they don't need to, and then months later their accountant forces them to, and you get it months and months later. It's really worth knowing up front that they intend to, that they know the rules, that it went out, maybe even that it's a little bit late and it's coming in a couple of weeks. That's all good. So I do recommend making a list of the people who you think owe you 1099s and just sending them some emails to confirm, hey, I'm expecting this. Do you have an ETA? Have a little conversation with them. All right. I think when you do that, you'll really simplify your taxes and take some of the potential for missed 1099 headache out of your taxes. And, lastly, I just want to say, first of all, what I see happen, I kind of talked about this before, but really what I see happen and where people get tripped up with 1099s is that they don't realize that the 1099 rules apply to them. They don't issue 1099s when they should. And then they don't learn the rules about issuing the 1099 till they hit that checkbox on their Schedule C when they're actually doing their taxes, several months later, maybe even 6 months later if they get an extension, right? They hit that checkbox. It says, did you issue all the 1099s you were obligated to for your contractors? And they're like, oh, shoot, maybe I didn't, right? Well, at that point, you still have to do it. There's no point where you get released from the obligation. You still have to issue them, even if they're really late. And now you've incurred some pretty heavy penalties. Then that person will often, late in the game, send out 1099s well after the people who receive that income have already filed their income tax returns. That scenario sucks because when you get a 1099 months after you filed your tax return, you are basically guaranteed a letter from the IRS saying, hey, you didn't report this income. What's the deal? And it looks like just a bill. Okay. When you get that letter in the mail, it just looks like a bill. They say, we received this 1099. It didn't look like it was reported on your tax return. The tax you owe based on this 1099 is blank. And they'll do the calculation for you. And they'll have a little line item and a return envelope asking you to make a payment. Now, if you did report that money, and I'm here to say, hopefully you're getting this message, you should have, and I hope you did. I'm encouraging you, always report all of your income. So long as you did, then your response to that letter can be the explanation that you did include that amount in your total reportable income on your Schedule C. And then you mail in whatever proof you can conjure about the fact that you really did include that number in there. And then that will make that situation all be okay again. All right. But it's annoying and it's scary. When you get a letter from the IRS saying that you owe money, it's a little scary, right? And so we want to prevent that in any way we can. So I hope that this has helped you. That is the biggest, and that's frankly the most common tax headache that I see in my tax practice. And so I want to help you head it off, because this time of year, before you have all that documentation in the door, fixing your mistakes, if you see those 1099s come in and the amounts are wrong, your name is wrong, your social security number is wrong, et cetera, or if you don't get 1099s you think you're supposed to, certainly if you owe 1099s and you haven't sent those out, make sure you do that before midnight tonight. So I hope that that has helped you understand. And hopefully what we've done today is head off some big tax headaches for you this season. All right. I hope that has been a good episode for you. Let me know what you think. And I'm going to ask you a quick favor. So I'm trying to make the most useful episodes I can for you here in this upcoming tax season. Will you tell me, if you could ask me one question that you wanted me to answer for you on a podcast, what would it be? What would you want me to talk about? This can be something really nitty gritty about your taxes, about setting up retirement, Roth versus traditional IRA, entity choice, whatever you want to ask me. Let me know what you would like to hear me talk about on a future Sunlight podcast episode. You can send me a DM at Sunlight Tax, or just send me an email to the hello inbox, hello@sunlighttax.com. We would love to hear from you. I would love to hear from you. I am planning out my content calendar for the next couple months, and I'm really doing this podcast to serve you, to meet you where you are and help get you through the tax season with more ease and more money. So let me know what you want to hear, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.